So let me tell you a little bit about myself. I am an IT veteran. I've been in IT now for 40 years. I started in 1975. I've been a CIO. I've run startups. I've worked as a consultant. I've run consulting practices. And more recently, I was research director for cloud at Gartner. I then left Gartner and started my own consulting business. I do consulting for Gartner. I've done something around 15 or 16 cloud strategies for Gartner clients in the last 4 years. And I also work with a lot of vendors on helping them understand how to position cloud services in the marketplace. My interest in cloud actually started in 1999, going into 2000, when I saw the emergence of what was called utility computing in those days. And I wrote the methodology in this book and put it into practice. So I am a practitioner around cloud services as well. I ran a project for about 2 years at the International Monetary Fund in Washington, D.C., to transform internal IT into lines of service. So compute service, storage service, data backup and recovery services. And, you know, what's really interesting, that's 10 years ago. What's really interesting is the challenges we had then. The technology was relatively immature to do all that stuff. But the fundamental challenge that we faced wasn't technology, it was culture. The lines of business giving up the IT capital budget and handing that over to IT and instead expecting, demanding and getting services was fundamental. A whole load of communication, change management in terms of culture was necessary to bring that and make it effective. More recently, I'm also involved in a number of initiatives around Internet of Things, which of course is driving the whole new business models around digitization. You know, we're living in a fantastic world for some people. It's a more challenging world as you get older to stay on top of. But, you know, the world's largest taxi company now doesn't have any taxis. That's Uber, right? The world's largest booking agency doesn't have any hotels, Airbnb. So well, these business models are coming because of the availability of technology. And really, my view right now is we're only on the cusp of that change. As we get more sensors and things connected to the internet, the ways in which we will be challenged, both personally and in business and in society, will be dramatic. And the opportunities for business are also equally dramatic. So when I go out and I meet with executives such as yourselves, people in the IT arena, what are some of the things that we get talking about? And I'd like you just to look at this. It's a bit of a tag cloud, a word cloud, because this has come from the last couple of years, conversations that I've had and areas of concern, top of mind issues. So we'll just take a couple of them and we'll explore them a little bit as we go through the presentation. Agility. You know, that I call that the A word today, because when somebody says to me, well, Mike, we've got to be more agile, I say, well, what do you mean you've got to be more agile? Right? What is agility to you? Is it business agility, meaning we can innovate quicker in the business? Is it IT agility, meaning we can turn on and scale up and scale down services more quickly in response to business demand? We've got one of these kind of words that I think back to the late 90s, we had the word solution. Suddenly every IT product became a solution. Some of you may remember that time. Well, now we've got the A word, and it's equally ambiguous. So when we talk about agility, let's define what we mean by agility. Is it business agility that's the requirement and the need for change, or is it IT wanting to respond to business demands more quickly? Shadow IT. Neil touched on shadow IT. Big topic. Everywhere I go, people are concerned with shadow IT. If they don't mention it to me, I mention it to them. I say, do you have shadow IT in your organization? I did a project 2 years ago in Holland, and I was talking to the CIO. He said, no, we don't have any shadow IT. And I said, I find that hard to believe. I did a round of interviews with lines of business, and I uncovered 60 different cloud services that they were using that he had no visibility for. And this is a challenge for CIOs, right? I faced a similar challenge a few years ago, in 1983, when I was running a mainframe data center, and client-server compute just became available. I had a 3-year application backlog. I was in a secure job for life, building applications to run on mainframes. 2 years later, I had no application backlog. And there were all these little things, boxes sitting under people's desks, right, running individual applications. And you know what was scary when we came to the 1990s, and I realise this is probably sounding a bit like a history lesson for some of you, but in the 1990s we went through BPR, business process reengineering, right, globalisation, enterprise resource planning. The challenge there was finding all those boxes with the information on so we could integrate them into a global fit-for-purpose system to run our businesses. My view on that, you know, that's child's play compared to the challenge you will have in the future with shadow IT and stranded data assets in the cloud. The challenge with shadow IT is, frankly, that those contracts are made on an individual basis, an expense basis, without the governance, without the security, without the knowledge of the business. And today, the challenge for companies is not controlling infrastructure, it's controlling information. Information, and as Neil pointed out, it's not just protecting it in a walled garden, it's getting information into use by the business in new and innovative ways. So those are some of the topics that the CIO and his leadership team are talking about. When I talk to the lines of business, because I act in many situations as an interface between IT and the business, this is what I'm hearing, a set of concerns that are really putting heat on the guys cooking the infrastructure and cooking the applications. First of all, speed. The business wants to move more quickly. And why does the business want to move more quickly? Typically, that's because its competition is moving more quickly. This isn't necessarily an altruistic requirement. This is an absolute necessity to stay in business and stay profitable. The need for speed does not connect well with traditional IT. And the reason for that is quite simple. When we buy an IT system in the old model, we go out and specify the system, we put servers in, we plan capacity. To increase capacity, we have to go and buy more infrastructure, we have to rack it, stack it, wire it, connect it, provision it. All of that stuff takes time, right? So today the need for speed is incompatible in many ways with our traditional IT model. Capacity is something that costs. And actually, one of the concerns of business is asset utilization. Most businesses now are running quite lean. You know, they optimize supply chains, they minimize inventory holdings, and yet IT sits there with a set of assets that are underutilized. Think about this. Why did Amazon start AWS? Well, they started AWS because they were an e-tailer, and they had to provision capacity in IT for their peak days, and they have 10 peak days a year. The rest of the year, 355 days, they were running at an average of 25% utilization of those assets. They could not afford to do that. And they started Amazon Web Services to sell surplus capacity. So think about that in terms of your business. You know, have you got surplus capacity simply because of the IT model that you're running? Flexibility, the ability to move workload to where the people are rather than move people to the workload. That flexibility doesn't come with static IT resources in data centers. It comes when you can connect everything and use networks and data communications to drive the flexibility in working methods. Some of the companies I'm working with today are already planning the next generation workplace. They're already investing. They're not thinking in terms of VDI. They're thinking in terms of beyond that. How do we collaborate with our partners? How do we enable our employees to act efficiently, get access to the data, control that data, use that data? And finally, there's cost. With the traditional IT model, it's a high cost. It's a capital-based model. It's driven a whole industry that today is worth $3 trillion a year. That's a lot of money that the business is now saying, in order to innovate, in order to capitalize on the opportunity that is coming through digitalization, we need to stop spending capital on IT. We need to find new, innovative ways to buy the IT we need. And so these are some of the business concerns with IT. I've talked about the digital revolution. I believe it is a revolution. It isn't just something that's evolving. We will see, we're at a tipping point now. Over the next 2 or 3 years, I think we'll really see a fundamental change in the way, the nature of services that we use. We've seen it over the last 5 or 6 years, probably a little longer with mobile devices, the app stores, the way we just expect things to work. And Apple, I think, was quite clever in taking on the might of Microsoft, not by bringing out competing products, but by looking at how devices can be used by individuals, recognizing that those individuals are also in the workplace and they take their demands into the workplace. And we see that with bring your own device, right? So we're challenged now with this whole digitalization. And the point that I want to make about this is it's not a technically driven change. This is not technically driven. Who's at the heart of this? It's your customer. Your customer demanding new services from you, new ways of consuming data, new types of services, both electronic and standard, physical products. But they are interacting in different ways with your business, and they have a different expectation. If there was no demand, there would be no need for the cloud of clouds. Right? It would be a marketing exercise. It isn't, because the customer is demanding the kind of changes, and then business is looking at how do we fulfill those changes. Business needs to be able to respond. Let's just look back 10 years, maybe 12 years, to a Friday night at home. You got the television. It wasn't an LED television in those days, right? And you might go down to Blockbuster and rent a video. You had a VHS player. Along comes Netflix and says, well, you don't need to go and buy or rent VHS tapes anymore. We'll stream, or DVDs, we'll stream that. So Netflix sets up its business allowing you to dynamically stream digital content. What did they use to fund that business? They didn't go out and get a load of capital investment. They went to Amazon, right? And they launched that service, and they still run that service on Amazon. Because as you consume it, you pay them a fee, and they can pay for the service that's being used on Amazon. That was quite an interesting model, and then Amazon realized, last year, hang on a minute, we're missing a trick here. Because all that infrastructure we've got is getting used by Netflix to deliver this service, and we're only making a small amount of money on that. So what did Amazon do? They disintermediated Netflix. They went direct to the content providers. They have a contract with Disney for content, and now they stream content on Prime, right? So if you're a Prime user on Amazon, then guess what? You get that content free. You can stream it. And, of course, they picked up one of the great TV shows when it disintegrated last year from the UK, which is Top Gear, and they've signed up Jeremy Clarkson and co. to do a program. So they're now getting into not just buying pre-built content, but they're creating content as well. Right? So that's an example of how disruption is getting driven. And, no business is safe today. Every business needs to respect and respond to the fact that there is disruption. Someone, somewhere, will be looking to disintermediate your business model and take away maybe not the whole business, but a piece of the business, and possibly the most profitable piece of the business as well. I say the future's looking cloudy. If I just look at the compound annual growth rate of spending on cloud, it's around 10 times the growth in IT budgets. Over the last 2 or 3 years, average growth in IT budgets somewhere between 2% and 4%, right? Average uptick in cloud spending is somewhere around 22-24%. This is a stat that I've used data from a number of different analysts, and I've looked at that data and I've amalgamated it across the different parts of cloud to give you a sense of the growth that's happening in the market today. The growth is being driven by lines of business as well as IT departments. So my view on this is, number one, are you aware of this huge uptick? Are you seeing an increase in your budget? If not, that's an indication that shadow IT is happening in your organization. Because somehow companies are spending a lot more money on cloud today than they did last year, and they'll do the same in the next year. One of my pet peeves about cloud is, what is cloud? Right now, Neil stood up, Barry stood up, I've stood up, and I've used the word cloud. We've probably, if we did a count on the videotape, we'd probably find we've used it a couple of hundred times already, and we haven't actually defined it. So I'll define it for you. So, back in 2009 when I joined Gartner, there was a big fight about whose definition of the cloud was the right definition. Gartner's quite a proud organization. I came into Gartner with a load of practical experience from utility computing and challenged some of their thinking around what the definition of cloud was. And in the meantime, we had the National Institute of Standards and Technology in the States, and NIST, come out with their definition. In actual fact, when you distill it down, it's a 3-4-5 model. There's 3 types of cloud service: infrastructure, platform, and software. There's 4 deployment models: public, private, hybrid, and community clouds. And there's 5 key defining characteristics of cloud that separate it from other forms of IT. It's scalable. It's elastic. It's service-based. You don't buy assets. It's metered, you pay somehow for the consumption you use, and it's network accessible. Not the internet, it's IP, typically IP, so it's not a proprietary network either. Those 5 characteristics uniquely define a cloud from other forms of IT services. And I meet people who say, well, that's nonsense because that means a private cloud isn't a cloud. Well, if we had a couple of hours, we could debate that, right? One of the CIOs I was working with, I heard the discussion from his architecture team, and I said, well, what you're describing as a private cloud isn't actually a cloud, right? And he said to me, Mike, he said, if it looks like a duck and it quacks and it's got feathers, we're going to call it a duck, right? In other words, it's what we define cloud to be is more important than the definition. Actually, I think he's wrong, because when you're looking at the characteristics of cloud and you're thinking of them literally, then the ability to buy services that scale dynamically, that you pay for as you use, without the requirement to put down a load of capital in infrastructure, that's a significant difference to the business. And that's what we are trying to drive at with the 3-4-5 definition. If you want to look further into that, just Google NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology. Gartner has a definition as well. The NIST one is a little more prescriptive. For example, they talk about a self-service portal. At Gartner, they don't talk about the portal. They talk more about those characteristics. So what am I seeing in terms of cloud adoption? Well, principally 4 patterns are emerging. There's the business-driven usage, which is predominantly around SaaS, but is increasingly also around the development of next-generation applications, cloud-native applications. And I want to spend just a moment on the difference between the way you think about an application in the old world and an application in the cloud world. So in the old world, the application requires that the infrastructure provides scaling, security, availability, and recovery. The infrastructure and the application come together at a runtime, but the application requires that the capacity in the infrastructure is sufficient, that the security arrangements are provided at an infrastructure level. That was great when everybody using the application sat inside a firewall and typically when you were just serving internal employees. Contrast that with a cloud where the application needs to be very aware of the infrastructure in which it's running. It needs to be able to scale, right? And scale means requiring access to those resources. It also means that you develop the application not as a monolithic single entity, but that application that might have, 10,000 function points is implemented in the cloud as 10,000 separate applications that communicate over the internet or the network in order to request services. That's how come Facebook can do 13 code releases a day into production. Contrast that with most IT shops where a change to a system might take 13 weeks. Facebook is doing 13 code releases a day, promoting them to production. Of course, it's not the whole of their environment. It's selective pieces of that application jigsaw. So when we think in terms of cloud and the evolution of cloud, businesses are developing applications that will scale on the web because they're serving consumers, maybe doing marketing support where the demand is very flexible. The second, and we heard Neil talk about BT's capability here, is that IT is building private clouds, and we'll just suspend my animosity towards the use of the phrase private cloud for a few minutes. But IT is building private clouds in order to get some of the benefits of cloud available to the business. Right? And they're also starting now to buy IT utilities as a service. So there's this subset of SaaS, which is not business applications, it's more IT applications. I'm thinking here of tools around backup, recovery, archiving, service desk, that are all IT tools, and even email, that are now available as cloud services. And why is IT doing that? Well, IT is often under pressure from a skills perspective and a capacity perspective. So if I can now take workload that I'm responsible for that the business probably sees no value in, right, or low value, it's keep the lights on stuff, and I can move that to a cloud, then I've freed up infrastructure and I freed up the resource requirements that I have and the skill requirements that I've got or need. So that gives you an advantage. And then the fourth capability or pattern that I see is around the independent software vendors. Microsoft's got a huge push into its ISV market of transferring Windows-based apps to Azure. And it wants to do that because the desktop control is now also moving to the cloud. But ISVs generally need partners to help them. If they're application developer mindset, they're not service delivery mindset, then they are looking to cloud providers to do all of the delivery of that application. Not only the delivery, but also the metering, the way in which they get paid, the way in which consumption gets tracked. So there's an ecosystem building up, and Neil talked about the ecosystem and showed how that was evolving on the right-hand side of the Cloud of Clouds vision. One of the things that I've realized in doing the consulting work that I have is that, the cloud conversation actually needs to permeate the whole business, because different stakeholders are affected by cloud in different ways. So no longer is it just that IT is controlling or not controlling, but let's have a look at a couple of interesting pieces of research here. So, if we think in terms of the business, and executive, they're the white bar on that chart, the CIO and IT director in the middle, and then the IT manager and staff. So cost reduction, Yeah, that's pretty important to the business. But if we look at the longest orange bar for the CIO and IT director, it's about cloud being a modern approach. Business not particularly concerned about that. So we need, in our thinking, to provide an education and awareness of both the benefits of cloud and also some of the challenges of cloud. Down here you've got environmental benefits. We heard a little bit from Neil about the modern data centers, I think one in Colombia, which is a state-of-the-art data center. Google started this, actually was one of the early developers of very efficient data centers. And there's a three-letter acronym, our IT industry is littered with them, called PUE, Power Usage Efficiency, which is basically the power coming into the data center versus the power that is being used on the actual IT infrastructure. In a traditional data center, that can be 2 or higher. In a modern data center, that's down at 1.2. And you heard about the impact of that. Driving efficiency in the power usage of the physical data center means bottom line savings using the cloud. And all the cloud providers have very modern data centers with very low PUE, i.e. very high power usage efficiency. Okay, so CIOs are between a rock and a hard place, frankly, today, right? The business is saying, IT is essential. It's not just automating the back office anymore. IT is right there in the front office, driving connections with and communications and collaboration with partners, supply chain, employees, and customers. Right? So the challenges are that, IT needs to reduce the opportunity cost of IT. What do I mean by the opportunity cost? Well, for a manufacturer of pharmaceuticals, an opportunity cost is when IT is delaying the launch of a new product. Right? In order to have the right IT environment to meet regulations, the opportunity cost is the cost of not earning from that product for a period of time because IT is taking a long time to provision resources to meet regulation and compliance requirements. We're also getting challenged as CIOs to reduce the total cost of IT and move from a capital expenditure model to one where the expense is in line with the usage, because that's the way in which business runs. Today, lean manufacturing, you don't have big stock holdings of parts, you bring them in when you need them, and so you're balancing your costs against your income. Amazon's got a pretty good model for that. They hardly hold any stock. So Amazon is actually a bank, because you pay them, they ship, and then sometime later they pay the people who supplied you with the goods. So these are a set of challenges that CIOs and the IT leadership teams are facing. And these seem to be incompatible. If I look at this list, I think, well, how can I achieve all of these outcomes, right? And especially given that the business is now off doing its own thing. It's buying IT services behind my back. Why is that happening? Well, first of all, IT vendors are targeting lines of business. Salesforce doesn't go and talk to the IT director. He goes and talks to the sales director or the marketing director. Workday doesn't go and talk to the IT director. He goes and talks to HR and admin. So the vendor community is targeting business users, and they're able to respond because a lot of the governance of IT is based on capital expenditure. And when there's no capital expenditure, then the business can go and commit to using external services. I talked earlier about the time in the industry when I was running data centers, mainframe data centers. The same challenge happened there. Only it was just the amount of capital. Because the capital controls, I created a set of data centers for Getty Oil in the UK, and the capital controls were that anything that cost more than £50,000 had to go through IT, which was pretty much everything in the mainframe era, right? But when client-server architectures came in, suddenly then there was a lot of availability of compute that would cost less than that. But that wasn't caught by the governance engine, which led to the sprawl that I spoke about earlier. The same thing's happening with cloud, only this time it's not capital expenditure, it's gone to a business line of expense. So these are some of the reasons why shadow IT is becoming a problem. And also, if I look at the statistics from the likes of Gartner, IDC, Ovum, they reckon that up to 38% of spending on IT is now not controlled by the IT department. Now, that might or might not be happening in your business. If you say, well, Mike, no, that's not happening in my business. I'd say, how do you know? Because if you don't know what's being spent on the cloud, then you don't know what budget you're now not getting to control. So, shadow IT, big issue. And it's a big issue not just from cost and the erosion of IT control. It's a big issue because of security, because of the likelihood of stranded data assets, the likelihood of data loss, data breach. Now, the cloud providers say, well, actually, our clouds are more secure. And in a lot of cases, they're probably right. But the fact is, unless you know where your data is, you can't leverage it. And when it's in islands, separated islands, individual islands, then the connection back of that and integrating into the processes becomes a real challenge. One of the projects I'm working on at the moment is how best should the internal IT organization look at their role, given that cloud usage is accepted in that organization. What are the key challenges they're facing? And one is that when you take an application like Salesforce and you run your CRM on Salesforce, what happens when you take an order? You update Salesforce, but that data needs to come back into your manufacturing system, your supply chain system, your financial system. So now I've got that data out in the cloud. Now I need to integrate that data back into my quote-to-cash process. So we're seeing now a change in the nature of the conversations, or I'm seeing a change in the nature of the conversations. 5 years ago, it was about, how can we adopt cloud? What should our cloud strategy be? It then moved to, well, how do we integrate cloud into our IT strategy? And now the conversation is, how do we shape the IT organization recognizing that cloud is a component of our IT strategy? So I've seen an evolution in the 5 years since I spoke first with Neil. And that has been a change in the nature of the challenge that IT sees around cloud. So many organizations are now talking about a two-speed approach to IT. Gartner has a phrase for that. It's bimodal. Horrible phrase. But that's what they've chosen. McKinsey's a little bit more normal about their vocabulary. They just call it a two-speed approach. Right? Fast IT, meaning agile IT, more responsive, and traditional IT. So mode 1 and mode 2 in Gartner speak. Mode 1 is traditional IT, typically capital-based. Mode 2 is much more fluid, much more likely to be addressing the challenges of connecting with consumers and driving scale. But it's not as simple as that. A singular IT transformation, in my view, is not the way to go about achieving this. Actually recognizing that these are two fundamentally different organization and operational models for IT is the way today to address this challenge. So my question to you is, what type of IT ship do you run? Right? Do you run an ocean liner? Mode 1, focused on tight controls, change control, governance, very planned, well executed approaches to minimize cost, minimize disruption to the business? Or do you run the Riva speedboat, which is much more about being dynamic, building new systems quickly, much more about teaming and collaboration, much less about control and policy? needing different kind of vendors, different kind of infrastructures in which to deploy it. Because one of the challenges you have, if you're starting to develop in this way, but your infrastructure is run like this, the developers get terribly frustrated, right? They turn out new code releases, they quickly respond to business needs, and then somebody in the infrastructure team says, well, yeah, we'll get you a new server provisioned in the next 3 weeks. Guys, we're talking, hours and days for this versus months and years there. Now, it's not a question of either or, in my view today. I think you've got to do both. I think you have to be very explicit that the demands on the traditional IT are such that our operating model for traditional IT is good. It delivers results. Be happy with that business, Mr. Businessman. But actually we need to have a fast track that will be much more responsive to your needs and much more dynamic in the way we fulfill your requirements for that A word that I mentioned earlier, agility. So in terms of thinking about cloud, one of the key challenges if you're not just developing is, okay, so how can we decide what goes where? If you follow the BT Cloud of Clouds vision, you have a lot of choice about where you run workload. Do you run it on your own data center, traditional infrastructure, a private cloud, colo? Do you run it on a SaaS somewhere out in the left field? Or no, it was, your left field on that diagram. So how do you decide that? 4 years ago, I developed, whilst on a Gartner project, a decision model for cloud that looked at workload and said, what is a good workload to move to the cloud? So I assembled a team of experts in Gartner to develop that, and we looked at about 8 different factors, one of which was technical. What about latency? Is this application latency sensitive? Does it require synchronous commits? Very difficult to achieve in the cloud. We looked at SLAs. What SLAs does the business need for this? We looked at variability of demand. Does this application need to cater for highly dynamic demand? Because if so, it's more suited to a cloud environment, better suited. We looked at governance, data security. Of course, that's now a really hot topic, data sovereignty, especially with the EU ruling 3 weeks ago that invalidated the provisions of the safe harbor arrangement with the United States, right? So there were a set of 8 different dimensions or domains that we looked at in order to technically evaluate the suitability of an application to run in the cloud. We also had the challenge of, well, what about the commercials? So we also looked at the commercial model, and some of these challenges are not just about a workload moving to the cloud, it's about how do you deal with many workloads in the cloud. About 3 weeks ago, I got a document to review from a major energy organization that I'd done some cloud strategy work for in 2012. It was a 60-page document. It was from the office of the CIO, and it was describing the challenge they have now, today. How do we control service levels and give support to users in an environment where we've got 400 different SaaS suppliers? Huge challenge, huge challenge. So what we're seeing is it's not just going to one cloud. There's many clouds. Now we need to interconnect them because of the business processes and access to data. Now we need to manage that whole end-to-end environment. The traditional management approaches, frankly, don't work. They expect that you are instrumenting infrastructure and you're collecting event, and that doesn't work when you don't own the infrastructure. So what is the single point of control that you have across all of that capability? It's the network. So we're seeing a renewed attention on the network, not just as the connection device, but as a control device, as a point of getting visibility for what's happening across your total infrastructure, or total IT estate rather, whether that's infrastructure you own or whether it's infrastructure from other providers. Okay, a little bit of suggestions here about ways to think about this. If you're on a journey, which most of you are, I suspect either not today, 100% non-cloud or 100% cloud, so you're on a journey, it's a transition. So I find this quite a useful conversation starter, a little grid, okay, Boston matrix. So on the left-hand side, vertically, we've got internal, on the right-hand side, external, and then we look in the horizontals at dedicated versus shared. Most companies were on a journey from dedicated systems to virtualized infrastructure. That's been the last 10 years, right? The hypervisors and the evolution beyond the hypervisor. But now we're looking at, okay, well, how do we scale this? What type of workloads? How do we plan our journey across to the cloud? How should we be measuring it? What KPIs are important? Is it the number of applications we run? Is it the budget amount that we spend over there? Is it the level of infrastructure capacity that we have? Now, I can't give you the answers. These are questions you need to think about as you plan that journey. But what's important is to have a model and share that model of how you're making that transition. Because if you have multiple lines of business, multiple stakeholders, some of whom will go to the cloud, some of whom are probably being held back, then a variation in your decision process actually causes quite a lot of political upheaval. So I advocate people thinking about their cloud journey, perhaps using a more sophisticated model than this, but having KPIs, publishing those KPIs, and the 5 pieces of guidance that I would give. Number 1, cloud is a long-term and it's an investment-driven decision. Initially, cloud was tactical, right? It was skunkworks, it was test dev, using Dropbox, putting stuff up on a personal account on Amazon. But it's gone beyond that. We're seeing business-critical workloads move to the cloud. GE announced a few weeks ago that they were looking to run all of their IT on Amazon. Now, whether they will or not is another matter, but that's a statement of intention. And it's partly to illustrate that cloud is an integral component of an IT strategy there, right? Cloud first, perhaps. It's not just bolt-on, accepting that some stuff is going. It's actually wrapping your arms around it and developing a strategy for this. One way to do that is to, if you want a clear starting point, is to agree a statement of intention. And to catalogue your strategic planning assumptions. So why are we doing this? Is it to give agility? Is it because we believe that cloud's going to be more cost effective? Is it going to give us more flexibility? What are the principal assumptions you are using to underpin your cloud journey? And what are the targets? As shown in the previous diagram, there are lots of different ways of targeting your cloud journey. Measuring the KPIs and contrasting your progress against the assumptions and the KPIs you set out originally is a good way of staying on track and continuing to communicate with the business. I talked about this earlier, the challenge of moving from a control of infrastructure to a coordination of services. That's not just about a platform to do it. It's about the skills, mindset, the posture of IT in your organization. I got some research actually this morning from SimConnect, which is a Society of Information Managers in the US, talking about the changing role of the CIO as a communicator, getting much closer to the business and having many more business conversations than historically. And finally, as you move to the cloud and you get a lot of different cloud usage, you need to have some way of coordinating that. So do you become an internal cloud broker? I'm working with some organizations who say, yeah, we want to do that. Our retained IT organization is going to focus on services and integration of services and service delivery. Others are saying, we need to get help with that because it's a different skill set. So actually the companies that you entrust to help you on that journey, they need to be there for the long haul. there's disruptors in the market that are driving change in IT, in the way we provide IT and consume IT. And some of those have fallen by the wayside in the last couple of years. One was Nephologic. It was an enterprise-grade cloud storage company, and it had a lot of customers. And then 2 years ago, September 13, it gave 2 weeks' notice to those customers that it was shutting up. And so those customers went into scramble mode. How do we get our data back? Fortunately, IBM and Amazon bought them and integrated the storage into their respective clouds. But there is a huge volatility in the market right now. So pick your partners carefully. And as you've heard from BT, they're putting a stake in the ground around cloud, not just a cloud, but connecting clouds. And I think that the connection of multiple IT domains is really key to retaining a level of control and visibility for the service and value that you deliver.